2.6 is planning the proof and objectives 4 and 5. Okay, so this is where things get a little tough. So I think that you may have to watch this video more than once if you or you need to do a lot of practice. This is where things get a little bit tough. Okay, so let's just start with warm up. Okay, list 4 components of a proof, not reasons to justify proof or statements. The reasons we did the postulates, theorems, properties, given information, and what am I forgetting? Theorems, postulates, properties, given information, and definitions. Okay, so those are the reasons. The 4 components of the proofs are the given information and prove. Okay, so that's where it starts. And then what you got over here in typical proofs, it's a diagram, right? And then you have the statements and the reasons, right? Okay, so this is how the typical proof is set up. So this is one component, given information, 2 component, what's to prove, diagram, the 3rd component, and the 4th component is the proof itself. Okay, so those are the 4 components of the proofs. So this is the if then, right? If this is true, then this is true. That's the conditional. And to prove the conditional false, you just have to come up with one counterexample. But to prove the conditional true, you have to go through all this. It's a lot harder to prove that it's true. Okay. All right, so we're going to do a lot of proofs in this section. Okay, planning the proof. The objectives 4 is to state and apply the theorems about angles, supplementary to or complementary to congruent angles. Okay, so this is the new theorems that we learned in this section. And the plan proofs, and then write them in 2-column form. Okay, so that's the typical proof that we do, 2-column forms. All right, so let's start with planning the proof. So let's read this together. Okay, before you write the steps in the 2-column proof, you will need to plan the proof. So you have to plan it before you start writing it. Sometimes you will need the statement of a theorem and see immediately how to prove it. Other times you may need to try several approaches before you find the plan that works. So you may not see how to prove it right away, and then you have to think through. If you don't see a method of proof immediately, try reasoning back from what you would like to prove. Think, this conclusion will be true if blank is true. This in turn will be true if blank is true. Sometimes this procedure leads back to a given statement. If so, you have found the method of proof. So if it doesn't work, then start from the prove, going back to given. Study the proofs of previous theorems may suggest a method to try. For example, the proof of the theorem that vertical angles are congruent suggests the proof of the following theorem. Okay, so there's a new theorem here. There is often more than one way to prove a particular statement. That's true. There are more than one way to prove a proof. And as long as it's correct, all are correct. So there is not just one correct answer. The amount of detail one includes in the proof may differ from person to person. You should show enough steps so the reader can follow your argument and see why the theorem you are proving is true. As you gain more experience in writing proofs, you and your teacher may agree on what steps may be combined or omitted. Okay, so we start with writing out everything, and as we practice, And as I understand that you know what you're doing, I may let you omit or combine some of the lines, okay? All right, so let's do this one together. And then you're gonna try the theorem 2.8 on your own as a homework, because it's very similar to 2.7 proofs, okay? All right, so here's the theorem. If two angles are supplements of congruent angle, if the two angles are supplements of congruent angle or of the same angle, then two angles are congruent, okay? So if 1 is congruent to 2 and 3 is congruent to 4, and these two angles are congruent, then these angles are also congruent. The angles supplementary to congruent or the same angle, so if these are supplementary, for example, they are congruent, okay? So here's the given information. All right, so we start with line 1. Angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary, and angle 3 and angle 4 are supplementary, and that's given. So if they are supplementary, their measure adds up to 180. So let's just write that. Measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 equal 180, and measure of angle 3 plus measure of angle 4 equal 180. So what do you think the reason for that is? I just said if they are supplementary, they add up to 180. So it's a definition of supplementary angles. Okay. And then since these are both equal 180, you can combine them. You can substitute this into here, right? So let's do that. Measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 equal measure of angle 3 plus measure of angle 4, and that's substitution property step 2. Okay, this goes into here. And line number 4. From the given, we know that measure of angle 2 and measure of angle 4 are congruent. So measure of angle 2 is congruent to measure of angle. No, I'm sorry. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 4, and that's given. We can't do anything with this with a plus and equal, so we got to change this to measure. So line 5, measure of angle 2 equal measure of angle 4, and that's the definition of congruent angles. We practiced this so many times, hopefully you know that by now. So since these are the same, 2 and 4 are the same, you can subtract the same thing from both sides of the equation, and you get the measure of angle 1 equal measure of angle 3 by subtraction property of equality. And the last line we have to get here. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 by definition of congruent angles. And we are done. Okay, so here's the pattern that we use to prove this, that if two angles are supplementary to congruent angles, they are congruent. Here is the other theorem that is very similar. Okay, the two angles are complements of congruent angles. Now it's a complement instead of supplementary. Or of the same angle, then two angles are congruent. Okay, so prove theorem 2.8. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do the given and prove and diagram together. You do both the statements and reasons on your own, but you can model this one. Okay, you can pretty much follow this. It's very similar. Okay, I know some of you are gonna have trouble doing this, and that's okay. I want you to try it. Okay, so given angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary, and angle 3 and angle 4 are complementary, and angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. Okay, so here's angle 1 and angle 2 and angle 3 and angle 4, and 2 and 4 are congruent. Okay, and you do the proofs. Oh, prove angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Okay, so these are givens, and that's to prove. Okay, all right, so you try this for homework. Fill in both sides. Okay, all right. And let's do some more practice. Okay, so in each exercise, use the information given to conclude the two angles are congruent. Name or state the definition or theorem that justify your conclusions. So this is a little bit tricky, but what they are saying is that they give you the information. You have to identify two angles that are congruent, and you have to give a reason for it. For example, let's do 1. 6 is complementary to 10. This is complementary to this. And 7 is also complementary to the same angle. If the two angles are complementary to the same angle, they have to be congruent, right? So this is angle 6 is congruent to angle 7 by two angles complementary to the same angle are congruent. Okay, don't say theorem 2.7 or 2.8. You have to spell it out. Okay, so you do this for homework. This is video. Okay, you can do this one homework. You can do this one. All right, let's do this one. This one is video. 5. All right, 4 is supplementary to 6. Okay, so this is supplementary to 6. And 2 is supplementary to 7. And 6 and 7 are congruent. So these two angles are supplementary to the congruent angles. So they have to be congruent, right? So angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. And the reason is angles supplementary to congruent angles are congruent. Okay, see the difference? Two angles complementary to the same angles are congruent. Two angles supplementary to congruent angles are congruent. Okay, and then I want to try this to see if you can do this. Okay, this is a little tricky, but I think you can do this one. All right, and are there any angles in the diagram that must be congruent to angle 4? This angle. Now, don't assume this is 90 degrees because nowhere it says it's 90 degrees. So don't tell me that all angles are congruent because you don't know they are 90 degrees. Which is the one that you know that they're congruent without any other information? We just learned it in 2.4. The vertical angles are congruent, right? So this. So angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. Okay, now B. If angle 4 and 5 are supplementary, name all angles shown that must be congruent to angle 4. Okay, so angle 2 is already congruent. If these are supplementary, right, the angles that are supplementary to congruent angles are congruent, right? So, for example, 5 and 8 are supplementary to each other. So 8 is supplementary to 5. 4 is supplementary to 5. So angle 8 have to be congruent with angle 4. And also, look here, 5 and 7 are congruent, right? So if 4 is supplementary to 5 and 6 is supplementary to 7, 6 and 4 have to be congruent. So angle 6 have to be congruent. Or the other way to look at it is if 4 and 8 are congruent, 8 and 6 have to be congruent because they are vertical angles. So they have to be the same. I don't think there's any other ones that you know by this diagram alone that they are congruent. Okay? Ready? And here comes a lot of them. All right, so I want you to do odds here. Try it. Okay, you have to give a reason. Some of them you already know. The AD plus DB is AB. That's segment addition, right? Postulate. And some of them are new, so I want you to try this. Just odds, okay? And then let's do this one. I think you can do this fill in the blank. Copy everything shown and complete the proof of theorem 2.7. We did this already, right? Theorem 2.7. Yeah, this we already did. Okay, shouldn't be in there. Sorry. All right, and this one. Let's see, and then we start doing proofs after this. All right. So let's do this in a class. Start from here is a class. Okay, so we are done with the video. So you don't do this, just do odds here, and we already did this one. So you do this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay? All right. See you in the class.